a tiny Dutch trading post, transformed into the world's most iconic skyline. This is New York City, where native tribes thrived, revolutionaries plotted, and immigrants built their dreams from concrete and steel. But how did a swampy island become the capital of the world? Buckle up, this is the history of New York City, and it's wilder than Times Square on New Year's Eve. Before the towers of glass and steel, before the streets pulsed with the footsteps of millions, the land that would become New York City was a realm of mist and marsh, whispered through the reeds by the voices of the Lenape. They moved like ghosts through the dense forests and along the winding waterways, hunting, trading, and waging quiet wars beneath the ancient canopy. Their trails, paths of knowledge and blood, would one day become the arteries of a city that would forget them. By the time the first European sails cut through the horizon, the Lenape had shaped the land, coaxing crops from the earth with fire and bone, drawing life from the endless veins of rivers and the bounty of the bay. Yet, their dominion was doomed, their voices destined to fade beneath the relentless tide of conquest. The soil that had nourished them for generations would be taken, their homes turned to ruin, their people scattered to the winds. The land remembered, but the city would not. The first European eyes to witness the waters of New York belonged to Giovanni de Verrazzano, whose ship, La Dauphine, cut through the mist of the Narrows in 1524. He named the land New Angoulême, a fleeting christening for a place that would not yet belong to his people. For nearly a century, the land remained a whisper on maps, visited only by traders and wanderers who saw in its rivers and forests a wealth of fur and fortune. Then, in 1609, Henry Hudson arrived, not seeking conquest, but a passage to Asia. Instead, he found a kingdom of beaver, their soft pelts a currency that would set the wheels of empire in motion. His report did what muskets and war had not yet done. It marked this land as valuable, as something to be claimed. And so the fate of the Lenape was sealed, not by swords, but by greed. The river would bear his name, the beaver would adorn the city's crest, but the people who had fished these waters long before the first European sail appeared would become little more than shadows in history's relentless march. The Dutch came not with armies, but with commerce, planting their outposts in the cold, silent wilderness of 1614. New Netherland appeared on maps like a whisper of ambition, its true claim to history yet to be written. By 1624, families disembarked on Noten Eiland, now Governor's Island, staring into the vast unknown of the Hudson's mouth. With the hammering of Fort Amsterdam's timbers, a city's bones were laid, but its heart was built with suffering. African slaves, torn from their homelands, raised the defenses meant to keep out Englishmen and natives alike. Blood stained the earth in 1643 when Willem Kieft, drunk on power and fear, unleashed a massacre across the Hudson, turning Pavonia red. The Algonquians struck back with a vengeance that nearly cast the Dutch into the sea, but more ships arrived, more muskets, more death. In the end, the natives signed their peace with hands trembling from defeat. Then came Peter Stuyvesant in 1647, the iron-willed governor who ruled with one leg and an unyielding grip. He presided over a colony that grew restless, its streets echoing with voices from a dozen nations, its soil soaked in the sweat of 300 enslaved souls. By the 1660s, the land of the Dutch was no longer truly Dutch, but something darker, something tangled in trade and tyranny. The names of Flushing, Harlem, and Brooklyn would endure, but the people who had built them, who had fought, suffered, and bled for them, would fade into the city's ever-hungry past. The Dutch surrendered New Amsterdam not with a battle, but with ink and quiet fury. On August 27, 1664, 4 English frigates loomed in the harbor, their cannons dark and waiting. Stuyvesant, wounded by time and fate, cursed the invaders, but when his people refused to bleed for a lost cause, he bent his knee to the inevitable. New Amsterdam became New York, its Dutch soul smothered beneath English rule, its fort renamed, its future rewritten. War raged across the Atlantic, the Dutch clawing at their lost colony, but treaties sealed what muskets could not. Briefly, in 1673, the Dutch ghosts returned, renaming the city New Orange. Yet within a year, the English had reclaimed their stolen prize. And so, the city swelled with new blood, its streets thick with immigrants chasing the dream of wealth, bound by laws that strangled the land to feed the city's hunger. The Bolting Act of 1678 shackled the countryside's mills, forcing the lifeblood of grain to flow only into New York's coffers, feeding its rise until its repeal in 1694. But power was restless here, never secure. In 1689, amid the tremors of England's glorious revolution, Jacob Leisler seized control, a man who believed he could defy fate. For 2 years, he ruled as a king in everything but name, until the noose found his throat, and the city swallowed him whole, as it always did with those who stood too tall. New York City became a battlefield of shadow and flame, a place where liberty and tyranny clashed in darkened alleys and blood-streaked streets. The Sons of Liberty, restless and unyielding, waged a decade-long war of defiance against British rule, their battle over Liberty Poles a symbol of a city teetering between rebellion and submission. The Stamp Act Congress of 1765 ignited the first embers of revolution, but it was war that set the city ablaze. In 1776, after the disastrous Battle of Long Island, George Washington retreated, his forces broken, his hopes flickering like a dying candle. New York became a loyalist fortress, a British stronghold where traitors to the crown were rewarded and patriots were hunted like animals. 2 great fires consumed the city in an inferno of suspicion. No one knew who struck the match, but all smelled treachery in the ashes. Nathan Hale dangled lifeless from a British rope in Manhattan, his final words lost to the wind, while across the river, the prison ships of Wallabout Bay became floating tombs, swallowing the lives of more American soldiers than the battlefield ever could. For 7 years, the city was a cage of occupation, a bastion of British dominion. But on November 25, 1783, the streets that had once echoed with the boots of redcoats trembled beneath the triumphant return of Washington. The last British sails vanished over the horizon, and New York, battered and scarred, belonged to the revolution at last. New York City, once the heart of a fledgling republic, pulsed with the weight of history and the fire of transformation. In 1789, within the hallowed walls of Federal Hall, the foundations of a nation were etched into destiny. Congress convened, the Bill of Rights took shape, and George Washington, draped in the gravity of revolution, took his oath upon the trembling stones of Wall Street. But the honor of the capital was fleeting, and by 1790, power drifted south, leaving New York to forge its own empire, not through politics, but through industry, ambition, and relentless expansion. The Commissioner's Plan of 1811 stretched the city's veins in rigid precision, a skeletal framework for future dominion. The Erie Canal, a silver artery cut through the wilderness, delivered wealth and power straight to Manhattan's doorstep, ensuring that by 1835, New York had eclipsed Philadelphia, standing unchallenged as the beating heart of America. The city swelled with the desperate and the damned. The Irish, hollow-eyed and starving from the Great Famine, arrived in waves, their sorrow swallowed by the restless machine of progress. By 1850, 1 in 4 New Yorkers bore the mark of exile from the Emerald Isle, their hands building the city even as they were buried beneath it. Beneath the rising towers and broad avenues, institutions of order, the police, the public schools, emerged to cage the chaos, but nothing could contain the hunger that drove New York ever forward, ever higher, toward its relentless future. New York City, a beast of ambition and corruption, fell into the grasp of Tammany Hall in 1855, its fate entwined with the iron grip of political machines and the desperate hands of the Irish masses. Power pulsed through the smoky backrooms where Fernando Wood, the first of Tammany's mayors, ruled with a cunning eye, shaping the city to serve its masters. As the elite dreamed of grandeur and carved out Central Park, a sanctuary of order amid the chaos, the city's lifeblood remained tainted with unrest. When war tore the nation apart, New York's soul fractured, its wealth tied to Southern cotton, its streets filled with immigrants who had no love for a union that demanded their blood for battle. In 1863, the city erupted in fury as Irish mobs, enraged by conscription, unleashed hell upon black neighborhoods and abolitionist homes. The fires of the draft riots consumed blocks, leaving behind echoes of horror, forcing the city's black residents to flee to Brooklyn's uncertain embrace. But even as the embers smoldered, New York surged forward, feeding off the tide of human desperation. The Statue of Liberty rose in 1886, a cruel promise of hope for millions arriving at Ellis Island, their dreams colliding with the ruthless hunger of the city, a metropolis that devoured the weak and crowned the cunning. At the dawn of the 20th century, New York City stood as an unstoppable force, a city of ambition and greed, swallowing the boroughs whole in 1898 to forge Greater New York. Steel and concrete clawed at the sky, birthing monolithic skyscrapers that loomed over a restless population. The city's power was unmatched, its streets pulsed with trade, its avenues whispered of high finance, and its skyline taunted the world with its towering ambition. But beneath the grandeur, New York's soul burned with tragedy. In 1904, flames engulfed the General Slocum, dooming over 1,000 souls, mostly German immigrants, to a watery grave. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory became a fiery tomb for 146 garment workers, their screams lost to corporate indifference. The Great Depression struck like a vengeful specter, turning prosperity into desperation, and the city's streets became battlefields of survival. Rent strikes erupted, thousands rising in defiance against landlords who bled them dry, while whispers of revolution and the Red Scare sent shivers through the elite. Yet, like a beast that thrived on crisis, New York pushed forward, its veins pulsed with the rhythm of subway trains, its arteries fed by the lifeblood of immigrants, workers, and dreamers who came seeking salvation, only to find themselves consumed by the city's insatiable hunger. The war was over, but the city was just beginning another battle, one of transformation, upheaval, and survival. Returning veterans and hopeful immigrants flooded New York, lured by dreams of prosperity, only to find a metropolis shifting beneath their feet. Wall Street surged, the city's pulse quickened, and in 1951, the United Nations crowned New York as the world's capital. But beneath the gleaming skyline, shadows stretched long. The Bronx, once a haven of working-class dreams, spiraled into decay, its streets choked by crime, poverty, and the slow death of industry. The great shipyards fell silent, the garment factories emptied, and blue-collar labor was abandoned for the cold efficiency of container ports and the sterile glow of corporate offices. Robert Moses' vision of relentless urban expansion began to crumble as voices like Jane Jacobs rose in defiance, halting his plans to carve expressways through the heart of Lower Manhattan. The city was a battlefield, between renewal and destruction, wealth and ruin, the past and an uncertain future. By the 1970s, the service economy was king, and finance, education, and media dictated the rhythm of survival. The Bronx burned, corporations fled, and New York teetered on the brink, its fate hanging in the balance, a city devouring itself to stay alive. The city that never sleeps has never stopped evolving. The 1980s saw Wall Street's triumphant resurgence, re-establishing New York as the global financial epicenter. But crime and unemployment still gripped the city, casting long shadows over its rebirth. Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and the Bronx found themselves at the heart of revitalization efforts, while new waves of immigration reshaped New York's cultural landscape. In 1989, David Dinkins made history as the city's first black mayor, emerging from the influential Gang of Four. By the mid-1990s, Rudy Giuliani's tenure ushered in an era of aggressive policing and economic expansion. As crime rates plummeted and Silicon Alley flourished in the dot-com boom, neglected industrial zones morphed into chic enclaves. The meatpacking district, Chelsea, and Williamsburg became symbols of reinvention. The city's resilience was tested again and again. The horrors of 9/11 in 2001 reshaped the skyline and the nation's sense of security. Bill de Blasio's mayoralty in 2014 focused on equity and affordable housing, until the pandemic struck in 2020, bringing New York to an eerie standstill. COVID-19 turned the city into a global epicenter of suffering, but even in the depths of crisis, it endured. Now, under Eric Adams' leadership, New York faces new battles. In 2024, the city's storied history took an unprecedented turn. Adams became the first sitting mayor to face federal corruption and bribery charges. The drama of power, ambition, and survival continues in the city that has seen it all, from boom to bust, from triumph to scandal. New York City isn't just a place, it's an idea. Where the Lenape fished, the Dutch traded, and millions still come to reinvent themselves. So tell us, what's your NYC story? Family memories in Little Italy? First Broadway show? Or just dreaming of that skyline? Drop your love or hate for the Big Apple in the comments.